Hey, what's up guys, I'm Praetorian, welcome back to Call of War. This is the second episode of our 3 video sponsored series, which is sponsored by the developers. And while the last episode kind of focused on telling you how to play the game, as well as having a call to action to come join us for our multiplayer series that was going to be starting, which was going to be 100 total players, 98 slots for subscribers after you take away the 2 slots that Jynx and I were occupying. And this is that multiplayer series. So we are currently on day 20 here, about to enter day 21 in 5 hours and 2 minutes. However, this video here is only going to be discussing the actions and events from day 0 to day 12. So it's mostly going to be focused on what happened here in America, considering the fact that my coalition and me, most of us were in America, and so that's pretty much what the video will focus on here. We'll have a little bit towards the end discussing some of the world events, while the third episode will then focus more on world events as my coalition then kind of started going out into the world. We had kind of wrapped up America and started interacting more with coalitions. So that'll basically be the format for this series, with this second video focusing on the events of America and the third video focusing on the world events. So this is my core territory here, guys. We discussed this in the previous episode, but just to kind of briefly explain again, all the territory here that does not have the stripes on it is the territory that I started the game with, and it is my core territory. So all the striped provinces up here in the north and down here in the south, those are all occupied provinces that I took from other players or AI countries. And so remember, those provinces only give 25% of the production. So essentially this core territory is the heart of my empire. It's where all my production comes from, where the majority of my resources come from. Well, I've got a pretty big empire, so I don't know if the majority comes from here, but a lot of resources come from here. So this is what I started the game out with. I did start the game as New England, which of course New England, as you'll notice, is not quite the realistic New England. We also have New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and we even got little bit over here for Washington D.C. So we've got the American capital here. So that's why I kind of picked New England. I grew up in Philadelphia. I'm from this area. I was born in New York. So I felt like this was a good place for me to play as. While Jynx started as Texas, and we'll go take a look at her empire here a little bit later in the video. However, you're not going to be staring at New England for this entire video here. I am going to be showing you guys some of the content that I recorded while it was happening, some of the action and events, the wars particularly, as they were happening. So I'll show you guys that recorded content. And then also, I'd really like to show you many of the newspaper posts. The ones you're going to be seeing on the screen now are the newspaper posts from day 0. So on day 0, we had to wait. We didn't have to wait that long for it to start. You do have to wait for the full 100 players to fill up before the match started. And I think it took about a day and a half to fill up so that we can start. Though it felt longer because I know everybody was really excited to start. And over the course of that day and a half, you were able to do diplomacy, and you're also able to post in the newspaper. So the newspaper posts that you're seeing now are from day 0. And overall, I really liked the way the newspaper was used in this campaign, in this match. A lot of flavor, a lot of role playing, a lot of fun stuff. So we're going to definitely have a little bit of a focus on that in this video. We're definitely going to show a lot of the newspaper posts, both from myself and from other players, and the anonymous post as well. Now, before we get any further in the video, one thing I'd like to mention is the use of gold by me. You'll be able to see, this is going to be completely transparent because you'll be able to see up on the top of the screen what my gold is at any time. And I know this is something a topic a lot of people talk about in the game is how much gold everybody's using. Since you are able to use it to speed things up, or it's a pretty useful resource. You can do a lot of things with it, between giving your units more health, to again speeding up techs, or the production of buildings, the construction of buildings, or the production of units. as well as to just get resources so that you can build more. So very useful resource, definitely something that's discussed a lot. So for transparency's sake, I will mention any like big uses of gold, because I did use a bit of gold, not a lot, but I used it here and there. So you know, I won't mention every little time I spent a little bit of gold, you know, for something little. But when you see that the gold drops a lot or whatever, you know, by a couple thousand or something, I'll mention what I use that for, as well as when it goes up, because you'll notice that it'll go up a couple times for different reasons, and I'll discuss why that is. So the first one I'd like to mention is the fact that you're seeing here, you know, on day one, when I show you guys this day one content from the start, you'll see I had about 10,000 gold, 10,000 something gold. Starting out, because I actually used quite a bit of gold in a previous campaign that I showed you guys in that first video. My campaign as South China did not go well. Now I did win the Libya campaign. We got a coalition victory in that. You also saw that in the first video, and that went pretty well. I ended up allying with Turkey, and we defeated the alliance that I think I discussed in that video. The alliance between Yugoslavia, it was Yugoslavia, Germany, and Poland. So I did get a win, my first win in the game, which was really exciting and really fun as well. But I also had a loss as South China. Did not go well. My coalition was just kind of ganged up by a stronger coalition that surrounded us, completely surrounded us, and was able to defeat us. And I kind of I didn't want to give up, just give up in the war and just, you know, let them roll over me. Instead, I used a bit of gold to fortify up, particularly to fortify the island of, I think the island's called Hanoi, something like that. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but I fortified that island up, built some level 2 forts on there, and then also sent all my units over there. Fortified a couple other provinces, kind of just like key choke points, and I used gold for all that, to fortify those up, and also to buy a few units as well, and just to cause as much like havoc as possible. And I'll probably have this on the screen if I still have the footage for it. And I just, like, you know, told them they weren't getting on my island. It was my island, and they were going to lose all their men trying to get there, and that's exactly what happened. I killed like tens and tens of thousands of dudes as they tried to take that island from me. You know, they tried doing naval invasions, they tried bombarding me with range units, they tried using air units, and while they eventually took the island, it was extremely costly for them. I think I had, just in that match, between the point when, you know, I had, you know, tried this strategy to the point where I left, I think I ended up having like a 5 point something kill death ratio with this coalition. So every unit I was losing, I was killing 5 of theirs. So it was really fun, but again, I did use a lot of gold for that. I used about 12,000 gold for that, so that's why I started the match with not very much. So after the day 1 footage, you'll see my gold jump up to about 20-something thousand, and that is because I did spend a little bit of money to get up to what the new players had. Because if you join this match as a new player, using those links that I had in the previous video, which I think most of the people in this match were new players, then you started out with like 25,000 gold or something like that. So I did buy a little bit of gold so I would be kind of on equal terms with everybody. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into talking about the match and what actually happened here over the course of these first 12 days. So on day 0, a lot of diplomacy going on. Obviously, you guys saw the newspaper post there, and everybody started forming up their coalitions, because that was one of the things that you could do on day 0. So our coalition was called the P+J Legion, you know, the Legion for short. That's what most people called it. And the starting members were, of course, myself and Jynx over here in Texas. Now you'll notice she also has New Mexico. She starts with New Mexico, and this is her core territory. So Jynx is from Texas, so of course she had to play as Texas as soon as she found out that I was playing in America. So of course the first step of the match was to kind of build our coalition up and kind of determine who was going to be on our side. So when I started out, I was surrounded by players, and I knew once I conquered some of the AI countries that were on my borders that I would have even more players on me. So I had Quebec up here. So Quebec occupied all this territory. You can kind of see from the flag here what Quebec was. So Quebec had all this territory, and then I had another player over here, Ontario, and they occupied all this, so they are on my borders as well. And then I had a player over here called Illinois. And then down here was 2 AI countries. I also had an AI country over here, which was New Brunswick. And then we had 2 AI countries here, which were Virginia and then the Carolinas. And then another player down here, which was South USA. South USA occupied, he had all Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. So he had basically much of the South, I should say the South east of the country. And so that was a player as well. And then we had Kentucky right here. He looks like a mouth or something eating my lands, or I guess eating Virginia. So we had Kentucky over here. So that was a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players on my borders. So definitely concerning to have that many players. So I knew I had to ally one of them. And I had determined right from the initial start of this, as soon as I had decided I was going to be New England, I had determined that I wanted to create a 13 colony situation where I had control of the entire eastern coast of America, the Atlantic coast. And then also I figured I'd probably conquer the Canadian territory up along the coast as well. So that was one of my goals right from the beginning. So I knew I couldn't ally Quebec or Ontario, and I knew I couldn't ally South USA since I wanted to conquer all that territory. So it really only left 2 countries to ally, and that was Illinois or Kentucky. I didn't really have a personal preference. I wasn't on Kentucky's border yet, but I knew I was going to conquer Virginia, so I knew I'd eventually be on his border. So I didn't have a preference, and Illinois contacted me first. He contacted me on day 0 and asked if I wanted to be his ally. He was a new player, so he was an experienced player, and he was a nice guy, so I was like, yeah, sure, we'll ally. And that was basically the only reason why I allied with Illinois initially, is because he contacted me first. So then when you look at America, you know that we have, me here, Illinois here, Texas here, and so I wanted one more North American ally, and so I chose to ally with British Columbia here. So this was his core territory right here. Illinois was this area here, which you'll notice is no longer under his control. We'll talk about that a bit later in the video. So British Columbia is right here. This is his core territory, and he was our 4th ally. He's a much more experienced player. So here are his stats. He's ranked 6,764, so that's a higher rank. I mean, I think that's out of I don't know how many players, 1 million, 2 million, quite a few. Just for reference, I think, I guess we'll take a look at my stats afterwards, so you guys can see in comparison how I compare to this more experienced player, and we'll also take a look at one of our other coalition members, our most experienced coalition member. But this is his stats. So I felt like we had to have a more experienced member, since our first 3 members, myself, Jynx, and Illinois, were all brand new. We'd all played, I think Illinois and Texas had played 1 match, the tutorial match, while I had played, the ones that I had showed you in the previous video. So we were not experienced players. So I felt like we had to have at least 1 experienced member, and British Columbia was that experienced member initially. That was our coalition. Again, those 4 members. So the beginning of most matches, including this one, is typically a period of early conquest. Usually, players go after the AI countries that neighbor them. Some players, though, choose to go after other players right from the start. So we'll go ahead and start discussing what each of my coalition members were doing for the first couple of days, and also maybe show a little bit of footage on that as well. Essentially, I had the 3 AI countries, New Brunswick, Virginia, and then eventually the Carolinas. And I went after him very early. So right from the start, I went after Virginia, and I started preparing for war with New Brunswick. So I was going to fight a 2-front conflict against these AI countries to try and get some resources and some industry right from the start. So this did get me the city of Richmond, which did end up becoming a key city of mine. I guess I can discuss what all my cities were kind of focused on, because I did specialize my cities. For the most part, I mean, they can kind of build anything in a way now that we're here later in the game, but Boston has always been my naval city. That is all they've been doing for the entire campaign, is building ships. You can see I'm building an aircraft carrier right now, which will in fact be my first aircraft carrier. I did not really focus on carriers in this campaign so far. So Boston has been building ships for the entire match, and I did have a very naval-focused campaign so far. New York was my higher level infantry, so I've got a level 3 barracks, so I'm building mechanized infantry right now, and that's really what New York focused on, as well as getting the commandos, since commandos can only be built in the capital, and New York did start as my capital. I thought about moving the capital over to Washington, D.C. The capital location is important for the morale of your provinces, so that's kind of a more central location for my North American territories, so it probably would have made sense to move it over there, but I decided to just leave it in New York. New York was the capital of America for a time, so it wasn't the first capital, of course, but it was a capital. I think it was the in-between capital. I believe it was Philadelphia, Newark, and then Washington, D.C. So I thought about moving it, but I ended up keeping it here. Plus, this is worth the 20 points, the 20 victory points. So it made sense to leave that as the capital for me. And so that's what they focused on. Philadelphia was a high industrial area. Got their infrastructure up pretty high early on, and so that allowed them to produce stuff like railroad guns, stuff that requires the level 3 infrastructure, as well as like level 2 infrastructure to build medium tanks. While Washington, D.C. has always been my aircraft production city. This is where I build my planes. So I conquered Richmond. Richmond was another area where I just built anything that I needed, with the exception of planes as ships, since they don't do either of those. I don't have anything to build those here. Mainly focusing on like tanks and artillery and stuff like that. So it doesn't even build infantry because I don't have a barracks here. And so I conquered Virginia pretty early, then went after New Brunswick pretty much at the same time. Got both of those conquered. Then shortly after conquering Virginia, I then moved into the Carolinas. Now, this would have been good for South USA to go after. So his line starts right here. You can see his flag again right here. So this was his territory. And then we had right here, in between these two areas, was the Carolinas. And this would have been good for him to conquer early on to kind of build up his industrial base. But I think he was trying to, now I don't know for sure, but I think he was trying to avoid borders with me for as long as possible. So therefore he did not conquer the Carolinas. And so I conquered him, which would not be good for him later, because he just didn't have the industrial base and the resources needed to build an army that could contend with the legions. So those were my initial conquest, those 3 AI countries. However, very early, I then also went to war with some players up here in Canada. So Ontario attacked Quebec. So Ontario was over here. His land stretched all the way back here, I believe. Yeah, all this was Ontario. Not all of it, but yeah, you can see this is all Ontario territory up to Thunder Bay. And so he occupied all of this. This was his core territory. And then he attacked Quebec really early on, and so I jumped in on that. So he ended up getting, I think, most of the cities here. If I'm not mistaken, he got all the cities. But I did get a little bit of territory here. I think it was, yeah, I got all this. From here on down, I took from Quebec, while Ontario took the rest. And of course, that was my first real fight against a player, since, again, Quebec was kind of weakened already because he was attacked by Ontario. So my first real war was against, for a player war, was against Ontario. And I did attack them relatively early on, I think day 3 or so. And I think I didn't record that, unfortunately. So I don't have any footage from that actual war. But it was relatively quick. He wasn't really too challenging. He kind of made some mistakes. He was a newer player as well. And I discussed those mistakes with him after I defeated him. I kind of told him, hey, like, this is why I was able to defeat you so quickly, and this is what you could have done better. For instance, he didn't, his artillery was just left alone. So when we had an artillery battle, a range battle, my artillery had other units inside of it that were able to soak up the damage, while his artillery, all the damage was going to it, and eventually I was able to destroy it. He also left an artillery just out on its own without any anti-air, which allowed me to attack it with my planes. But overall, it was a pretty easy conquest with one exception, and that was Toronto. So Toronto, he built a level 1 fort. You see it's damaged here. I still haven't built all this up because the industrial complex, the level 1 industrial complexes, They're kind of expensive to repair, and they require rare materials to repair, and frankly I have enough ICs. So a lot of the early territory I took that had the level 1 ICs, I didn't repair. But I did take Toronto, but it was a tough one, and the fortifications were part of the reason for that. And it was also because I had to go to bed. So I wanted to make sure I grabbed Toronto. So I sent my units, and I knew this might end up being costly, but I sent my units to attack Toronto and the back 2 provinces here while I was sleeping, and so they just kind of had to charge forward in order to get it done. And I did not expect it to be as costly as it was because it was just artillery and anti-air in Toronto. But yeah, I ended up losing a couple units because of the rushing them forward. So Toronto ended up being a little bit more costly than expected, but that was really the only losses I took was the battle for Toronto. Other than that, it was a relatively quick and easy conflict, and that did give me control of a very large amount of territory. Now, I didn't get all of it here because Illinois joined the war a bit late, after the conflict was pretty much over for the most part. I had defeated most of his units and taken, Toronto and a lot of his key cities here. So he was supposed to get several of the cities up here. I think he was supposed to get Timmins and Thunder Bay were the 2 cities he was supposed to get. So he did join the war a little bit late, and I think that was part of the reason for that was because of the time that I started the war, which I think he was sleeping. So that was the reason why he joined a little bit late. But he ended up having issues. I thought Ontario was defeated, but Ontario came rushing down and started taking his territory, and he actually lost several provinces in Ontario, and he had a bit of difficulty getting Ontario knocked out, and a lot of this territory was still in Ontarian hands for like days after I had thought they were already defeated. So Illinois did have a lot of issues with Ontario after I had already occupied the territory that I was, assigned to take. So as far as rival coalitions, the 2 Canadian countries didn't join a coalition. That's why we were able to attack them and then be, relatively quick conflicts. However, there were a couple coalitions in the Americas. So we had a few small coalitions of countries that have, formed it themselves. So you had the Canadian League, I think is what it was called, which was formed by this country, which I don't know how to pronounce this. I think it's Saskatchewan. But what we're going to be calling him for the rest of this video is Dandy, because that was his. I don't know if I can actually click on him. No, I can't click on him here. But that was his profile name, was Canadian Dandy. And he was also, supposedly he was a new player. But I guess he, this was a new profile. But I guess he had an older profile before. He had played the game a little bit several years ago, and then I guess maybe didn't know how to access that profile. So he was, in fact, a little bit more experienced than we initially thought. And Dandy is a player we're going to talk about a bit later in the video because he ended up being a real problem for the Legion for a little while. So yeah, he occupied here, and he had a coalition called the Canadian League or something, or Canadian Pact, I don't know what it's called, but he was the only member in it. And then we had another country here, which was North USA. And so they occupied, this was all their core territory right along here. So they bordered Illinois. So he bordered Illinois here. And he had his own coalition called like the American Empire. And so he occupied here. And then we had one more coalition, which was formed by Colorado. Colorado was the leader of that coalition. And they ended up being kind of our rival here in America. They were the only coalition that was somewhat similar in size to us. And so they were composed of Colorado, the one who began it, the Northwest USA, which occupied all this territory here. So, Washington and Oregon. So that was Northwest USA. And then South USA also joined that coalition. And then Kentucky joined that coalition too. So he was one of the initial members as well. And we'll talk about what happened with Kentucky here in a little bit. First, though, I'd like to talk about what the rest of my coalition members were doing in those initial days. So we'll start with Illinois. So he attacked Kansas, very early on. I think that was day 1. And they made a deal to split Kansas up. So I think the North USA took several provinces of Kansas. Kentucky took several provinces as well. And I want to say Colorado might have taken a couple provinces too. So they basically split this AI country up, the AI country of Kansas. So they attacked there, while Northwest USA, which again wasn't in my coalition, they were in the Freedom Pact. That was the name of that coalition. I don't think I mentioned that yet. But yeah, they're called the Freedom Pact. And the Freedom Pact's entire basically reason to exist was to oppose the Legion. That was in their mission statement, that they were here to oppose the the evilness or something like that of the Legion. So they're very much planning for conflict with us from the very beginning. So Northwest USA, he conquered Montana, which was an AI country here. So I did want to mention what our what our enemies were doing. So Jynx, she conquered Arizona. So that was her early conquest. So she went after Arizona. That was an AI country. So that's what she was doing. Now, British Columbia did not go after the AI countries that rivaled him, which he had one here in the north and he had Alaska. So rather than attack them, him and Dandy, which again, this is Dandy, him and Dandy decided to split the AI country, the human player country here in Alberta. They decided to attack him, I think it was day 1 or day 2. It was very early in the conflict, or in the campaign, that they attacked this player, and they decided to split it. And I think Dandy attacked first, and so he got much of the territory. I don't know exactly what happened there, but apparently there was a conflict between the two, between British Columbia and Dandy. Right from the start, they ended up going to war. Now, again, I don't know exactly what happened here, but I kind of think it was the fact that Dandy got Edmonton, which is the capital of this player's country, and the capitals were worth 20 victory points. Victory points, are important towards winning the game, but also the player rankings are, they're ranked on, based on your points. So every day you get to see how everybody's ranked based on the conquest from the previous day. So rankings are important. Everybody wants to be up high. So I don't know if that's why he did it, because it couldn't have been for the industry in here, because it was a level 1 industrial complex. So when Dandy took it and hadn't repaired it yet, and then when it was taken back, it was completely destroyed. So Edmonton didn't have anything in it after that. So it couldn't have been just for the industrial buildings here. It had to have been for the points, I would assume. So I don't know exactly what happened there or why they went to conflict, but it was a very early conflict where they ended it in peace. And I kind of feel like that was a mistake from the beginning here by British Columbia, because either that, the fact that they had that initial war, or the fact that he then later told Northwest USA that he was planning on attacking Dandy early on, which Northwest USA and him were rivals. And I don't know if he told him that to see if Northwest USA wanted to join in on that war, but he told him early on. And so we have a theory that maybe he then told Dandy. But maybe Dandy knew just because of the early conflict. Either way, Dandy knew that he was going to have problems with British Columbia, and he started preparing for that, which ended up becoming a major problem for British Columbia. And so I would say that was a little bit of a mistake on British Columbia's part. He kind of lost the element of surprise on Dandy. So Dandy made his own mistakes. Instead of, he knew that he was going to have problems with British Columbia, and instead of preparing for that war completely and devoting himself entirely towards that conflict, Dandy attacked Ontario at the same time that I did, around the same time that I attacked Ontario, so that he could, I guess, grab some more territory up from him. And I think that was really the problem we saw here in the Americas, is that not enough people allied with each other. You didn't have enough strong coalitions. The Freedom Pact was only 4 countries initially, but for most of the game it was only 3. And you had all these independent countries just doing their own thing. And they should have tried to stood up against the Legion here in America, which was the most powerful coalition. And if they all would have joined together, I think we would have had a very different campaign, and there would have been a lot more difficulty conquering America. But they didn't, and they all fought each other. They all attacked each other and fought each other. And so Dandy attacked Ontario, which distracted him and resulted in him not having as many troops over here as he could have, I think, to defend against British Columbia when British Columbia eventually invaded. So British Columbia invaded, and we talked before he did about it, because he was discussing, we were discussing whether or not he should do it now or wait till he was more prepared. But eventually he did decide to go ahead and do the invasion. Now he figured Dandy's troops were all in the east, and so it was a good time. And he thought he had the element of surprise, which he didn't. So he attacked in here, and he soon discovered, after he took the territory here that Dandy had occupied from that player in Alberta, as soon as he got to Dandy's core territory, he discovered that Dandy had built forts all along this line here. You can still see one here that wasn't destroyed, because I think that was a higher level fort initially. So he built forts all along here and had troops, and he also made sure that he paid attention to the terrain. So he had like tanks in the plains. Tanks do really well in plains. They have like a 50% modifier. So he had tanks in the plains, but didn't have them in the areas where they wouldn't get those modifiers. He had artillery, a good deal of artillery to fire back on British Columbia's artillery, and overall, it was kind of costly attacking this line of forts. So British Columbia lost a lot of troops, but eventually he did win. He was able to start progressing, and he thought at that point, I think he messaged me and said, okay, I've gotten the fort line, and I think I got this. So he started pushing in, thinking that Dandy was done for. But this entire time that he was holding him off on the forts, Dandy was building up a massive fortress in Regina. So he had built, I think it was like a level 2 fort initially. I think it was just a level 2 fort here in Regina. But he had a lot of troops. I don't remember how many exactly it was, but you'll see on the video here, because I did record all this. And he had I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 units. And it was a well-balanced army. He had artillery to fire back at British Columbia's artillery. He had anti-air to deal with the planes that he tried to attack him with. And he had some units to soak up the damage. So the siege of Regina took 2 whole days. He made some newspaper posts about that as well. And so all this was very costly to British Columbia. So this entire time that Dandy was at war with British Columbia, he was being supplied with resources by our enemies. So we know that there was at least 3 countries that were supplying it, because that's what Dandy told us. So we know what I think it was 2 countries that were in the Freedom Pact were supplying him, and then there was one other one that we still don't know who that was yet. It could have been anybody, but yeah, they were supplying him with resources, and that's how he was able to build so many units and build up his forts. And he made some newspaper posts about that as well, which I'll show here on the video. But yeah, it ended up being extremely costly. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, he sent out 2 light tanks right before his fort line was taken, which he had tanks here. If you recall, I mentioned he had tanks in the plains. And right before the fort line was taken, when he was just about defeated, he sent the tanks out. And then the tanks started racing across British Columbia's territory, attacking all of the cities to destroy the industrial complexes in them. And while one tank was destroyed pretty early by British Columbia's Air Force, which he had full air coverage here pretty early on, because he builds a lot of air bases throughout his lands so that his planes can get anywhere they need to get, and also destroying one won't completely dismantle his line, because planes are incredibly important for his tactics. So because of that, he was able to deal with one of the tanks. However, the other tank he had a little bit more difficulty with, and he went destroying some of those air bases, which also kind of hampered his ability to attack them in some ways. But really, it was about speed. Those light tanks are fast, very fast. And he shot all the way across Alberta, attacked many of the cities, and then got into his core territory here and destroyed some of the air bases, but luckily he was not able to get into any of his core cities. I was watching all this develop because I myself was a little bit worried that he would end up getting into one of the core cities, and I want to say the mountains is what stopped him. Tanks are really, really slow in the mountains, and I want to say he went into the mountains and that really slowed him down, and that's how British Columbia eventually got him. But the damage was done. He had really hurt British Columbia, both from that and just from the sheer amount of units and casualties British Columbia took from the conflict with them. While Dandy lost like maybe 20-something thousand in the conflict, British Columbia lost 40-something thousand. So an extremely costly conflict that I feel like British Columbia never really fully recovered from. He always was a little bit hampered by, how many units he lost from that conflict. So that's why I feel like it was important to talk about Dandy just for that reason alone. But then things were not over. Even after Dandy had lost Regina, remember he had all these troops over here in the east attacking Ontario. And from there, he kind of built himself a little bit of a country here from the remnants of Ontario and the AI country that was here as well. That I don't know if he had attacked earlier, or if Ontario did, or if they attacked them together. I'm not entirely sure what happened there. But there was an AI country here in between them. So he conquered all of this. All of this in the north was in Dandy's hands. And then this became his new capital, Winnipeg. And we'll come back to what happened with Dandy a little bit later in this video. But just remember that he's up here in Winnipeg with his territory, getting all his resources here, and clearly still getting resources from our enemies. And this whole time he's just continuing to build up as we were distracted with other matters. So to go on to those other matters, let's go and move over to Texas and what Jynxie was doing. So after she conquered Arizona, and don't mind what's going on down here, just ignore all that. You don't even see it. So the Freedom Pact attacked California, which was a human player, but I think he wasn't very active, just based on how the war went. It just didn't seem like he was very active. So the Freedom Pact in Northwest USA and Colorado attacked California, and then Jynx, I told her that she should try and grab some of the best cities here, because you'll notice that for California's territory, the majority of their main cities are here in the south. So I told Jynx, she could get those. I want to say Las Vegas was in California hands, yes. So Las Vegas was gained by Colorado. San Francisco was gained by Northwest USA, while Jynx was able to gain both San Diego and Los Angeles. So she was able to get those two cities that ended up being very important to her empire with building units and stuff. So she took that part of California. And again, Colorado got Las Vegas here. And there was a little split, I want to say, at the mountains. Jynx tried to create this split at the mountains so that she could defend here in this mountain territory if the Freedom Pact was to attack her. At the same time she was doing that, she was also conquering Oklahoma. So she gained this territory in Oklahoma. So now to talk about good old Kentucky. So Kentucky was part of the Freedom Pact. And, the Freedom Pact and the Legion, as well as, there were some anonymous newspaper posts in there as well. Right from the start, we're kind of already, having problems. So we're, and I don't know exactly who was posting some of the anonymous posts, but they're clearly from my coalition. And there was certainly some tensions between the two of us. And Kentucky contacted me and said, look, I am not trying to be part of this this rivalry that is happening between you and your faction and the Freedom Pact. He said he didn't want to be a part of this. That he was just joining the Freedom Pact just for his own survival, for it's a defensive thing, hoping that we wouldn't attack him if he was in the Freedom Pact, which was true. We're less likely to attack him if he was, in the Freedom Pact, since that meant that we were going to be fighting, all of his allies as well, if they supported him, of course. But he was trying to decrease tensions between our two coalitions because he really didn't want to fight the Legion. He knew he would more than likely get conquered, considering the fact that he had the Legion on, 3 different borders. He had Illinois up here in the north, he had me coming from the east, and then he had Jynx coming from the west. So he knew, being right in the middle of our territory, that he would not survive a war with the Legion. So he was trying to decrease tensions, and I told him, there's just no way around it. That there's, this continent is not big enough for our two coalitions to coexist. So I told him that him being in the Freedom Pact was a guarantee to having conflict with the Legion. And so we ended up eventually coming to an agreement where he would become essentially a subject state of the Legion, where he would have to honor any alliances we made or non-aggression pacts we made, any diplomatic agreements. He would not have control of his own diplomacy. Essentially, he would be a part of the Legion, just not an official coalition member, because at that time we did have 5 coalition members already, which we'll discuss the 5th coalition member here in a second. But we didn't have a 5th slot open for him to join, so therefore he was like a subject state. It meant that, he couldn't conquer anything without our say-so. So yeah, we did promise him some territory. I think we also promised him a port eventually. We said we'd give him a port province so that he could, be able to help us expand once we started focusing on, international conflicts around the world and outside of America. Since I always kind of considered America here, we're just like one country. This is just a civil war, that's all. So we brought him in as a subject state, and he would help us out in future conflicts. And the only real thing that he asked for is to not have to fight his former coalition members. That's really the only thing he asked for. But really, he just wanted to be able to play till the end of the game. He didn't want to be destroyed. So he joined the Legion as a subject state. This was not something that we announced. It was not something that anybody knew. So Kentucky continued to have foreign countries contact him about joining the coalition, about helping out against the Legion. And we actually tried to do that with several countries. Again, we'll talk about that later, but we tried to have several countries kind of like in a secret agreement with us where they could kind of feed us intel against our enemies. And Kentucky was one of those. So nobody really knew for a long time that Kentucky was a secret member of the Legion. So one of the first times he got to really help the Legion out was in the war against North USA. So Illinois and Kentucky attacked North USA, which again was part of his own coalition called the American Empire. So they conquered much of North USA, though Colorado and maybe Northwest USA, I don't know if he got involved, but I know Colorado eventually declared war as well and invaded into this territory, as did Ontario, because Ontario was still around at that time, and he came into this territory too. And eventually that allowed him to then, invade into Illinois once we invaded Ontario. So North USA got split between several different countries. I know that Dandy didn't invade him, so he never came into that. But Ontario did. So that created another border up here between Ontario and Illinois, which again, Ontario used to then invade into Illinois' territory and have some success, taking many of his provinces. So those are all the initial conflicts for our 4 American coalition members. And our 5th coalition member was Angola, which is a country in Africa. And Angola, we had kind of had another country that we were talking about allying with, and that was the United Kingdom. I really needed somebody to help me control the Atlantic. I wanted a naval power. We were also willing to accept somebody who would help control the Pacific instead, so a Pacific naval power. But I didn't want to be the only one, trying to, control the seas in the coalition, because I was the main coalition member that was building up ships. I think I was the only one really building up ships early on. I think I really focused on getting cruisers as early as possible. And I didn't want to be the only coalition member building ships. I wanted help in the seas. And so I was looking for a coalition member who could help in that regard. And so United Kingdom was a natural fit because he had clearly used his starting gold. He was another new player. He used the gold to rush out the battleships. And so he had a very large fleet, the most powerful fleet in the world. I think on day one, day 2, because he had like 2 battleships, I think. Very early. So he was a natural fit, and we got into contact with him, and he wanted to work with the Legion, and he seemed like he would be our natural 5th coalition member. However, we began to come into discussions with perhaps having him be our first secret alliance member before Kentucky had joined, as somebody who could feed us intel that our enemies had given him, not knowing that he was a member of the Legion. And so that was under discussion, perhaps not having him actually join the coalition. And I left that choice up to him. I asked him, would you rather join the coalition fully, or do you want to be a secret member? And he chose the latter. He said he wasn't really interested in winning. He just kind of wanted to help the Legion win. And he didn't know how active he was going to be either, which he's actually an inactive player now. I should mention that. At this point here on day 20, I think he went inactive. In fact, I think he went inactive this day. He knew he wasn't going to be as active, so he decided to be a secret alliance member, and that left a 5th slot, which Angola ended up taking up. And I think it was British Columbia's suggestion that we bring Angola into the coalition because he was very, very experienced. So here's Angola's stats. You can see he's ranked 3,568, 3.96 kill-death ratio, which is fantastic, very, very high. It used to be a little bit higher, but I think he had a loss recently where he took very high casualties. But yeah, it used to be a 4 point something. But yeah, very experienced player. and exactly what we really kind of needed, since, again, our coalition, the UK was a new player too, Kentucky's a new player, so pretty much everybody in the Legion was new with the exception of British Columbia. And so we really wanted to get a more experienced member, but Angola really fit because from the beginning he was helping everybody out. You know, he was posting on the newspaper suggestions to new players, trying to help people out, give them tips on how to play, sending links out to guides that he and other players have made. So he had offered to help us all out, all us new players out, kind of, you know, teach us stuff. And that's exactly what Jynx and I were looking for. We really wanted to learn all the intricacies of the game. So I thought it would be great to have, you know, a very experienced member on our team. So yeah, we brought Angola in. I will say I did not know how dominant Angola was gonna be when we brought him into the coalition. He ended up being the top player very early on. So a very, very good player. And he was the 5th member of the team over there in Africa. So he won't really be much in this video because he was kind of doing his own thing over there. But we'll look at his territory at the end. I'll show what his territory looked like on day 12. But yeah, he was over there fighting and also having some issues diplomacy-wise that I did try and lend my support in the newspaper through. But for the most part, other than us trading resources, he provided me with a lot of metal initially for building my navy, which was expensive, and he provided some metal for that since he had extra. I've sent him resources as well, some excess resources that I've had. So while we were exchanging resources throughout the game, you know, kind of covering each other's shortages, other than that, we didn't really, you know, have a whole lot of interaction with Angola. So he won't be in this video a lot, but he will be in the second video because that's when we really started working with Angola on the international stage. So the last event that happened in the first few days was an issue with France over the little island of Newfoundland. So Newfoundland has this one province of St. John's, and I'd heard from our secret ally in UK that France was coming over here to conquer this territory. And France had also made it very clear to the UK that he was planning for conflicts with the Legion. He had created his own coalition called the European Union. The initial members of that coalition were France, Sweden, and Italy, and they were the most powerful coalition in Europe throughout the entire game. And he contacted me on day 0, talking about how, you know, America and France had always had very friendly relations, and he wanted to maintain those friendly relations, and they didn't want any issues with the Legion. But then he went and told the UK a bunch of other stuff, that he was very much planning for conflict. And then he told the UK that he was sending a convoy over here, because the UK could see his convoy, since remember he had ships patrolling the seas. And so UK was able to tell me exactly what was going on, and that a convoy was coming over here. I did not own this territory yet. This was, again, under an AI country of Newfoundland. And so I made a priority of getting my ships over here, and also getting a unit over here to take this island. I then contacted France and told them that I had heard that he was coming over here to conquer this territory. And that would violate the Monroe Doctrine, which is something I reissued in the newspaper very early on. I said that no power, and this did not just apply to European powers like it did historically, this applied to all powers, whether they're in Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, did not matter what continent they're on, that they had no right to enter the Americas, North or South America. They had no right to enter the Western Hemisphere, and that doing so would be considered an act of war by the Legion. So I had said that on day 1, day 0, day 1, something like that, very early in the game. Everybody knew that they could not come here without first asking for permission. So I had made this clear, and France eventually asked for permission to take this island, and I told him no. I told him that, you know, I had just conquered New Brunswick, and thus I considered this island as part of my sphere of influence, and that he could not conquer it. Now, initially, it seemed like he wasn't going to listen to that, and like we were going to have a very early conflict with the European Union. And so I talked to him. I said, so I guess you have a convoy on the way already, right? And he said, that's correct. My convoys are going to arrive soon. And I asked him, well, are your convoys escorted by warships? And I just kind of left that open because I had warships over here, and I was not bluffing. If he brought his convoy here, I had planned to sink it. I had full intention to sink that unit that he was bringing over here. But I did end up, use diplomacy to avoid conflict. I told him, we did approve him going over to Greenland instead of this island. I mean, let's be honest. What purpose did he have coming here, out of all places, other than to conquer us? That's exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted war with us. He wanted a base of operations to attack the Legion. So I knew what he was doing. And so I told him he could go over to Greenland, which would still satisfy his desire to have a base of operations to attack the Legion. So therefore, he accepted it. What he didn't know is, of course, that I could see everything that the UK was doing, since we were secret allies. And I knew that the UK was already in Greenland, and he was already about to conquer it. So I knew that by the time France got up to Greenland, it would already be in British hands. And that ended up being the case. The French got here right before he actually seized control of it, and then it turned green, and now he knew that he was not going to be able to get Greenland. He had been played. So he wasn't able to get any territory. Of course, by the time he would have came back down here, I had already seized control of St. John's, and he was not able to get control of any of these territories. So that was just one advantage of us being friends with the British very early on. Also, you'll notice that this map is a little bit different than what we saw in that first video. You'll recognize this map a little bit better here. This is the map that I think most people use because it makes it very clear who you're at war with, where your territory is. All the territories of this color is ours. All of our allied territory is green, and any enemies that we have is red. So I'd say most players probably use this map mode. This is a prettier map mode for a video though, and I like being able to see the different colors of the countries as well. So that's why we're using this. You might not recognize it from the previous video because I don't think I ever showed this map mode. So one thing that I did forget to bring up that I meant to mention is that before the war with the Freedom Pact, you'll notice that I did get a big influx of gold. And the reason for that is because that is right when I finished up the Libya campaign, where we got the coalition victory. So that got me a good chunk of gold. But then also just the war with that other coalition. I killed a lot of units. It was a big battle. They were 3 powerful countries that we were fighting. So that got me a lot of achievements. So that got me quite a bit of gold just overall from that victory. And I got all that before the war with the Freedom Pact. So that's the reason why I jumped up from 20-something thousand gold to 30-something thousand gold. Because again, the achievements can actually get you quite a bit of gold, which is nice. Because again, gold isn't a very useful currency to have. So once I had secured my northern borders, taken care of the conflict with France, and I didn't have to worry about a two-front war, I really wanted to focus on the conflict with the Freedom Pact. I thought it was about time. I will show the newspaper post that I made before the war, which we called the Second American Civil War. And we had a lot of reasons to want to go to war with the Freedom Pact, besides just the fact that we wanted their land. There was more to it than that. The Freedom Pact had been antagonizing us from the very beginning. As I said, their mission statement was to be in opposition to the Legion and to destroy us. And thus, as you'd expect, they did everything they could to antagonize us and cause us issues, from giving supplies, 2 of their members giving supplies to Dandy up here, to the Northwest USA continually using spies to blow up our stuff and attack our stuff. He attacked British Columbia, he attacked Jynx in Texas, and he attacked me with his spies. And we gave him warning after warning to stop sending his spies. They even made him give us some money once. He gave me $25,000 to kind of pay for the damages that his spy had done. And, to avoid conflict, because I was ready to declare war on him then, because I was kind of getting sick of his spies. He was constantly sending them, and there was a lot of spies that we didn't know who they belonged to, had gotten away, and they could have been other countries, but I would not be surprised if those were members of the Freedom Pact as well. And just constant spy issues right from the start of the game for all members. I think other than Illinois, I don't think he had too many issues with espionage. But yeah, constant issues. I even had a lot of counter-espionage going. It just wasn't enough because everybody was really focusing on attacking us. So those issues we had with Northwest USA. Then Colorado kind of irritated everybody because he constantly joined in on our wars after we had already pretty much defeated the enemies over here, whether it was North USA or Kansas. Yeah, after we had defeated all the enemy units, he would then jump in and take a couple provinces for himself. So that was kind of annoying that he was doing that without really helping in the wars and just kind of taking a couple provinces easily. South USA had several. We had several issues with him. First of all, our spies discovered first Kentucky spies, and then my spy got the same intel. We had discovered a message going from him to an unknown person. Unfortunately, neither one of us, Kentucky nor myself, were able to determine through our spies who it was sent to. But he sent it to somebody, a plan to attack me using aircraft carriers and paratroopers. Now, I don't know if paratroopers can even launch off of aircraft carriers. I'm not entirely sure they can. I know that you can use naval bombers and interceptors, the fighters, off of naval bombers, but I don't know that you can use paratroopers. But maybe you can. That was his plan. He was going to build a bunch of aircraft carriers and a bunch of paratroopers, which he had already started building those paratroopers. He had also started building his navy up as well, which I obviously was concerned about since I was trying to control the Atlantic with the British. So he had started building a fleet up, and so I knew that he was going to be a problem. And then when we had discovered that intel that he was going to attempt to attack me with aircraft carriers, that was essentially our casus belli. That was our cause for war, was him planning to attack me. And he had already got himself distracted with a war here in the Caribbean. So this was another player country. It was they're called the Caribbean, and they own much of this territory. I don't know if they own all of them. Yeah, they own all of them. So this is all their core territory here, all the way from Cuba to Puerto Rico, Jamaica. I mean, these islands are his. And South USA attacked him, which did require him to load his troops up on ships, onto convoys, to do this attack. And he sent almost not his entire army, probably about half his army down here. And so it was the perfect opportunity to attack the Freedom Pact, because the only member of the Freedom Pact that had a good-sized army, that had been clearly building his army up, and it clearly had a well-balanced army. It had an air force, a few planes. It had a navy. He had built a cruiser, excuse me. He didn't have any carriers yet, but he built a cruiser. He had several destroyers. He had like 3 submarines, I believe. So he had a navy, and then he also had, a good-sized army as well. And so he was the most powerful member of the Freedom Pact, and half of his army was on these islands here. And I had a more powerful navy than him. So it was clearly the best time to declare war on him, when he wouldn't be able to get his army back without me sinking his convoys. So while he was down there busy in the Caribbean, we declared war on the Freedom Pact, which again, I will have that newspaper post up that kind of announced this declaration of war and all of the many reasons we had to finally go into conflict with the Freedom Pact. So we'd already kind of determined what land everybody was going to be getting and what everybody's job was. So I guess we'll start with Northwest USA and what happened with them. Northwest USA and largely built militia. He had an army of militia, which are not very good. Militia have their roles. They have things they can do okay and things they're all right in. But overall, they're the weakest unit in the game. They're just not very good. And he built an army of them. He had a bunch of militia. And so he was a pretty weak member of the coalition, despite him constantly harassing us. He was not very strong member of the coalition. And so British Columbia was going to invade into here and take all the territory that he has here, the territory in Montana and all of his core territory as well, while Jynx was going to attack him in California and take the territory he had in California. And then you had Colorado in the center here, and this was going to be largely up to Jynx to take most of the core territory here, including the capital of Denver. So she was going to invade up there from her territory in Arizona and New Mexico, while Illinois' job was to, the line was right here where Illinois was at, and he was going to invade into Colorado and take the northern parts of Colorado, as well as take all of Montana. He was going to take all of Montana, while, again, British Columbia was taking his core territory. So that was his job, Illinois' job. While Kentucky was just going to take 2 provinces from Colorado here. Kentucky's main role would be to help out against the South USA. So we had already split up the South USA's territory, who was going to get what. Jynx was going to take these 2 provinces here. So just these 2. while Kentucky was going to take all of Alabama as well as New Orleans. That was going to be his port province that we had promised him. Now, you will recall that Kentucky had said he didn't want to fight his former ally. So initially he did try and avoid going into the war with his ally. He didn't want to attack somebody he had been formerly allied with, but I did tell him that getting this territory was contingent upon him helping us in that conflict. So he ended up deciding to help us and to invade into here, and so that he can get that port province and get access to the world. So he would take all this territory, while I would fight the majority of the South USA's army. Now, he did have one very large army over here that Kentucky would have had to take on. However, Kentucky was a bit slow in invading. There were fortifications in several provinces that Texas and Kentucky had to take, while on my side of things, despite having a lot of his army over here, he didn't have very many forts. So I think his tactic was to use his army against me, and then to use forts against Kentucky and Texas. So not a bad strategy, I suppose, since you only have so many troops. So they had to contend with some forts, so that kind of slowed them down a bit. They were also a little bit more cautious. They had other fronts they were fighting on while I did not. So they're kind of being a little bit more cautious with it. Well, I really wanted to focus on like a blitzkrieg, a lightning war. I wanted to go in quick, take them out quick. I used my Air Force, my artillery, and my other land units in unison to destroy his army very quickly and to take control of all this, on the first day, in a matter of hours. I mean, I had complete control of all the territory I was supposed to take here in Georgia and Florida before they had taken any of their territory. I think Jynx had taken one province, but this one was really fortified, so she had to bombard that for a long time to not avoid having an attack into that fort. And so she bombarded it for about a day to kill the units there. While Kentucky, I don't think, had taken anything yet. He had fought some units on here, but hadn't taken anything. So I had already done my entire assignment. So I moved my troops over to the border here to kind of assist them, to assist Kentucky. And it turns out that the one unit that South USA had in Jackson would then proceed. It was one army. It was his largest army that he had that wasn't on my border. So it was the largest army that Kentucky or Texas would have had to fight. He moved that army over to my territory, and I ended up having to fight him. And it was a little bit tougher fight because it was a bigger army. But I was able to take him out. The casualties were not bad. I had pretty low casualties, very good kill-death ratio against South USA. Eventually, Kentucky got through here and took all his territory. And after taking Florida, I then proceeded to get ready to invade the Caribbean. Now, we had been doing naval battles here. Again, he had a cruiser, which I quickly took out. Then I separated one of my destroyers from the cruiser to go look for his submarines, and I was hoping to be able to just engage two of the submarines at a time, and that's initially what happened, and I did destroy those two submarines, but then the third one had came into the fight, and unfortunately that was just a little bit too much. I was able to destroy the other two submarines, but by the time the third submarine attacked, my destroyer was incredibly weak, and he did sink that destroyer. But eventually we sunk the submarines. Jynx brought a destroyer over to kind of help me. Got rid of his submarines. He built another cruiser in the middle of the war. I had to sink that as well. So got his cruiser fleets sunk. And then from there, I was able to just attack his convoys that were attempting to come back from the Caribbean. He sent a couple units, a commando unit. I sunk them. But that was it. The rest of his army was just sitting in Puerto Rico, and I think by this point South USA had kind of given up. He had known that he had lost. It did not go well for him. He took extremely high casualties, and he had lost all his core territory. So it seemed like he had kind of quit by that point. And so I brought my troops first into Cuba, and just kind of started taking control of the Caribbean. And then I brought my fleet over here to Puerto Rico to bombard his troops. So I never attacked until I had killed the entire army there, and it took a long time to bombard them all because it was a big chunk of his army there. It was a very strong army there. So they didn't have any artillery though, so they weren't able to attack my ships back, and so I was just able to sit there and attack them without taking any casualties with my cruiser. So eventually conquered all the Caribbean. It did take a little bit of time, of course, because the embarking and disembarking times are pretty long, about 4.5 hours, I believe. To embark and to disembark. So it did take a while to get all the Caribbean conquered, but that was kind of what I focused on, while the rest of the coalition focused on finishing up the Freedom Pact. So Colorado at that time had clearly he was at least inactive for that day. I don't know if he had been completely inactive by that point. He hadn't gone under AI control though, so he was very easy because his units weren't moving. They just sit still because he wasn't online at the time. So Jynx and Illinois had a relatively easy time with him. Illinois had some trouble, which we'll discuss here in a minute. But Jynx didn't have too much difficulty. I know Las Vegas caused her some problems though, because I think there was a fort there, and I recall her having some issues there in Las Vegas with his units. But and she made a little post about Las Vegas too, which I'll show up here on the video if I remember to. So got all this territory conquered here in Colorado. Again, he was inactive. Northwest USA, again, not very challenging. British Columbia was able to invade in there pretty easily. But then Illinois went into Montana, and Illinois did not send enough units. So Jynx had told him first. He had sent all his units down here to the south, including units down here in Kentucky's territory, as if he was going to go try and grab Denver. Now, Illinois had been a little bit annoying, I'll say. I mean, like I said, he was a good guy, but he really wanted to be high up in the points. Like, it was really important to him that he was one of the best players as far as points go. And so he wanted as many victory points as possible, including the high victory point cities, the capitals, which he had several of by this point. You know, he had taken North USA's, which was Minneapolis. So he had taken that one. He had also taken Omaha here, which was, again, Kansas's. So he had several 20-point cities already in addition to the one he starts out with in Annapolis. So he had a total of 3 20-point cities. So he's up there on the rankings as far as victory points. And, like, for instance, when we were agreeing to attack Ontario together, he was demanding Toronto. And I was like, man, I've only taken, I don't think I had any 20-point victory point cities. I might have had Quebec. I don't know if I got Quebec or not. I think I ended up getting Quebec, actually. I think when I was talking about that war in the beginning, I said I didn't. But I think I might have got Quebec. So I only had the one that I had taken plus New York. Well, he had 3. So I felt like Toronto was closer to me, and he had more victory points overall. So therefore, I felt like it was only fair that I got Toronto. But yeah, he demanded it initially, saying he thought he should get Toronto. Eventually, we came to an agreement, though. But yeah, then same thing here. He just really seemed like he was going to race over towards Denver. And he had all his units down here for no reason. There was no reason to have his units here. That was Kentucky's job to take these 2 provinces. He seemed very concerned also in our coalition chat that Kentucky, because he wasn't really a full member of the coalition, was going to go and seize provinces that he was supposed to get. So he just seemed kind of a little bit greedy, honestly. Didn't seem to want to work as a team in a way. So we started having issues with Illinois. And then he had all these troops down here and not enough up here in the north. He barely had any troops over here. So Jynx told him initially, like, hey, man, you need to move some troops up there. That is not enough. And he didn't listen. So then I told him, like a day later, again, this is all while we were planning for the war with the Freedom Pact. I told him, hey, why do you got so many units in the south? There's no reason for that. He doesn't need units down here in Garden City or Colby. There was no purpose to be there. That was Kentucky's job. His job was to be up here. He should have had more units in Rapid City. He should have had more units here. But he did not. He had hardly anything up here. So I told him, hey, you need to send more units up north. That is not enough to invade Montana from the Northwest USA. And he didn't listen. He never listened to me. He never moved the units. And apparently other coalition members are more experienced members. Angola particularly had tried helping him, giving him suggestions on how to play better, because he had never built up any of his industrial complexes, which are incredibly important for building up because they allow you to build units much faster. So if you really want to get your army pumping out, you need to get industrial complexes building, get higher ranking ICs. And he was told to do that, and he didn't. And he never built them up. So he didn't listen to any of the advice being given to him by more experienced members, acting very greedy overall. And frankly, he was kind of the weakest link in our coalition. He wasn't very good. He was a newer player, and we were all newer players. But he didn't really make an attempt to kind of learn how to play the game, how to do well. He seemed like he was playing Civilization, where he would, like an old Civilization game back when we had unit stacks, where he'd create like a unit stack that was a balanced unit stack of everything you would need, right? Artillery, anti-air, tanks, infantry. and then he would just send them forward. And he told me he did this because he didn't have much time to be active, which was another slight against him in a way, because we wanted more active members. And so he would just send his units forward, and he would assign them to like go attack, 5 territories, 6 territories, so that they'd be doing that over the next 8 or 10 hours, including like sending tanks into cities, which tanks perform horrible in cities. They're absolute garbage in cities. They get like a negative 50% modifier in a city. So you do not want to send your tanks into a defended city. And so he just sent his units forward, and he took insane casualties in his early war. North USA, he took very high casualties. Ontario, very high casualties, and Ontario had a lot of success with him, a country that was already defeated. Ontario didn't have very many units. He had a few units, but he had a lot of success against Illinois. He invaded into his territory, and Illinois lost a lot of units again. Invading into Colorado, again, lots of casualties with a country that isn't even being controlled by anybody. The AI wasn't under control, the player wasn't under control, and yet he took insane casualties. And then up here, we learned about this later because Dandy had sent messages to British Columbia about it, which he then shared with us. And Dandy apparently was friends with Northwest USA. He was one of the countries that had given him resources. And so he told Northwest USA how to defeat Illinois. Told him what he needed to do to defeat him, how to defeat the units that he was sending forward. And he defeated the 2 little armies he had here, Northwest USA did, which from my understanding, Northwest USA was going to leave. His plans was to abandon his territory. I had talked to him. I told him if he wanted to retreat to the islands he had in the Pacific, because he had conquered several islands in the Pacific. And I told him if he wanted to retreat to those islands, he could feel free to do so. I didn't say he would be able to live there and that we wouldn't attack him later. But I did tell him that if he wanted to do that, then that was his choice. And so from my understanding, that's what he was planning on doing. He was going to retreat all of his units and try and get as many of them to the Pacific as he could. And he did end up doing that with several of his units over here, with British Columbia then promptly sunk with all his submarines. So he ended up losing a lot of his units in the sea while trying to get them to his islands. But yeah, he was going to retreat everybody. But then Dandy had convinced him to instead try a different tactic, with invading with light tanks, doing the same tactic that Dandy had done to British Columbia. And so that's exactly what ended up happening. He showed him how to defeat Illinois. Illinois lost the few units he had here, and then in came Northwest USA with some tanks taking territory, and then Dandy then took advantage of the situation as well. He had been building up in Winnipeg here, had built a big old fortress. I think he got up to like level 3 or level 4 fortress. I think it was a level 4 fortress. Yeah, you can see here. He built it up to like a level 4 fortress. I think they go up to level 5. And he built a little bit of an army here, and he attacked with light tanks as well. And then the 2 of them just invaded into Illinois' territory, just started taking all of his stuff, taking his cities, knocking out his ICs. You'll see that there's not one here in Minneapolis because of them. And yeah, the 2 of them just went down here racing through, taking territory. Eventually, Northwest USA retreated and went up north, but Dandy stayed down here for longer and ended up conquering most of this territory here, a lot of Illinois' territory. And we could have stopped him. Our coalition could have stopped him, but I contacted all the members and told them, you know what, this is the second time Illinois has been invaded by a defeated player, a player that's basically, weak and defeated. And I felt like he should, learn a lesson. Like, hey, because we told him many times to send more troops up in the north, that was not enough to cover it. And he didn't listen to us. So I said, okay, let's just let him learn his lesson. When he logs back on, because he was offline that whole time, because he just logged in just to send his units racing forward and then logged off again. And I said, when he logs back on, he can fix this issue. And so that was my initial suggestion. And I don't remember who suggested it first. It might have been British Columbia, maybe it was Angola. But one of them had suggested maybe that, if he gets conquered, then we'd have another coalition slot opened up. And maybe we don't need him. So that was the first suggestion of betrayal, I suppose, is what you'd call it. And from there, that's what we decided to do. We decided to get rid of Illinois. He didn't want to listen to advice. He was greedy and a lot of problems with him. So we just decided to attack him. while he was weak. All of his troops were in Colorado, so Jynx was the main person who had to fight his units, unfortunately, and she didn't really get much of his territory, just the territory he was assigned to get in Colorado. So she got all the northern part of that state, while me and Kentucky split the rest. And part of the deal with Kentucky was that, you know, due to his competence, he had been very competent in the war so far. He had made the effort to learn how to play the game, unlike Illinois, and he had done very well in the conflicts so far. So in reward for his competence and his loyalty, because he had been very loyal to us, we decided to make him a full member of the coalition with the attack on Illinois. So as soon as we declared war, we brought Kentucky into the coalition for the first time, and I took this territory of Illinois, including his capital, while Kentucky took all of this territory. And then up here in the north, a lot of this was supposed to go to Illinois as well, and I took all this over from, I think Dandy owned it at the time. So I attacked Dandy here, and I never fought any of Dandy's units. There was nobody here when I attacked in here. So I took all this, while Kentucky was then assigned to take the rest of Dandy's territory here in the north. And again, I told you guys, he built Winnipeg up into a fortress, and again, took 2 days, like Regina, to take the fortress, and again, it was incredibly costly. Kentucky lost a lot of troops there, and I could tell from talking with him that he had kind of got a little bit frustrated with it as well because of how many losses he was taking, trying to take the city, because again, it was a level 4 fort, so it was a challenging fight. In addition, you know, he had tanks that he tried coming into British Columbia again, and that did not work out that time. I don't know exactly what happened there. But I know he only took one province, and then he retreated back into his territory here. So yeah, it didn't work out. Clearly British Columbia had stopped that. That tactic wasn't going to work again. And he just really had a few tanks up here in the north. He had a little battle here, I think it was on Snow Lake, where he killed several of Kentucky's units. He even lost one of his tanks, I believe, and then he retreated back up into his territory here in the north. Up in Baker Lake is where Northwest USA had retreated to. Illinois had retreated up here. So Illinois had Baker Lake, and this is where his army was, and he had a good sized army here. I think it was like 1 artillery piece and then like 5 light tanks that he had sitting in Baker Lake. And so I had to deal with that. That's the main thing that my army did here in the north, while Kentucky was dealing with Dandy. And so I killed the rest of Illinois' units. That's all he had left. Northwest USA did get a unit away, which he fled, and we'd eventually see him a little bit later. And then Dandy also got 2 units away as well, 2 light tank units, which I eventually sunk with a submarine. I think he had fled. He was hiding somewhere in here. I don't remember where, but he was hiding over here, and my submarines eventually found him and sunk his final 2 units. And that was the only fighting I did with Dandy. So I never had to fight him, but he was very much a problem for both British Columbia and Kentucky early on. But eventually we destroyed him. The terrorist was destroyed, which is what we called him, because that's what he did. He was just terrorizing people, destroying cities for no reason. He had a reason. He was destroying the ICs, of course, but just think about what happened to the civilian population from those attacks. So we had knocked Dandy out finally. We had knocked out Illinois and taken his territory, and most importantly, we had destroyed the Freedom Pact, the only real coalition here in opposition to us. And so at that point, North America was ours. Like, we had seized complete control of North America, and this is the borders you see is the borders that we had created by that day. The way that ended up going down as far as what day, day 8 was the beginning of the Second American Civil War against the Freedom Pact. Again, we had destroyed them relatively quickly. They weren't too challenging. The Caribbean situation took a lot longer, I would say, to get that finally wrapped up. Again, because of naval invasions, the convoying, embarking, and disembarking convoys are really slow. And the embarking and disembarking all takes a long time. So we still had to get that wrapped up. And then, of course, Dandy, as I said, the siege of Winnipeg lasted 2 days. And I would say I think we invaded Illinois on day 9. So the day after we invaded the Freedom Pact. And then we waited another day before Kentucky and I invaded Dandy. So that was on day 10. And then it took 2 days to get Dandy defeated completely. And so that was day 12. So by day 12, we had completely defeated Dandy, Illinois, and the Northwest USA, with the exception of the one unit that Northwest USA got away and the 2 units that Dandy got away. Colorado, again, was very quick. Taking this territory in Northwest USA was also quite quick. And then by day 12, I had also taken all of the Caribbean. So that was why we decided to stop here at day 12, because that's how long it took for us to gain control of all of America and Canada. Day 12 is also, or maybe it was day 11 actually, was the beginning of Texas's war against North Mexico. So North Mexico was split between North and South. North Mexico was, we had a non-aggression pact with him for the first week, I think, of the game. But it was a temporary one. I had said it. The last one we had done was for 2 days, and it had ended several days before Jynx attacked him. But he felt he was safe up here. He thought he was friends with the Legion. In fact, he shared his map with me, so I knew exactly where all of his units were. And he had them all down here. All of his units were down here. And so there was only a couple units to guard his border with Texas. And so Jynx was able to kind of race through here and not have to do too much fighting. Now, he did start popping out a bunch of militia once he realized he was at war with her. And so he popped a bunch of militia out that she had to deal with. But overall, pretty easy conflict with him. He did bring his army up north finally, and then Jynx was able to intercept him in the mountains. She put her commandos there, and again, I could see exactly where he was going, so I knew he was going through, I think it was this mountain province here, and so she just ambushed him there with commandos where his tanks were weak. What had arrived there was pretty weak anyways, because she had bombarded him with artillery and planes the whole way up north, and he had contacted me when she declared war on him. And he had contacted me and said, "Hey, I hope me destroying your wife Jynx is not going to ruin our relationship, because I'm going to crush her." So I said, "All right, hey, I wouldn't expect you to do anything less than to defend your territory, but I think that crushing is going to be a little more difficult than you expect, because Jynx's army is actually pretty strong." And he did end up contacting me back later and saying, "Yeah, you're right. It didn't go so well." So Jynx defeated him with fairly low casualties. She did a good job. And that was on day 12 that she had conquered most of his country. So I'd say day 12 to day 13, since we had the Caribbean under control, we had all Central America under control, we had conquered North America. Now there were still a couple AI countries up here that British Columbia hadn't dealt with yet. And that fact would become important later on. We'll talk about that next episode. But other than those 2 AI countries, which we basically assumed were under the protection of the Legion, so they were still members of the Legion in our opinion, even if they were AI. We were protecting them. They're protectorates. So basically, North America was completely under our control as of day 12. So with the Caribbean wrapped up, I then proceeded to begin 2 invasions into 2 separate areas at the same time. I began sending troops to invade Venezuela, to start the conflict in South America. That was something we're going to talk about next episode, though. And then I also started convoying a very large number of troops across the Atlantic that were protected by my fleet as well as the British fleet. And even Jynx sent a couple destroyers over there to help protect my massive convoy chain, because I did do it as a convoy chain rather than putting all the troops together and then protecting them with your fleet, as you should probably do. But I was hoping that nobody would attack them. I was trying to get them over as quickly as possible. I didn't want to wait for the whole army to get together. I didn't wait for the whole army, in fact. And so I just kind of convoyed it over in a stream of troops, which was very risky. So I did make sure that we had a lot of ships protecting it from me, Texas, and the British. And it ended up going fine. We didn't have anybody attack me in there. I was really worried, though, that the EU would attack my ships, my convoys with their submarines, but they did not. I don't even think they were aware of it. And I began to prepare for the invasion of France, and France at this point had gone AI. So he was no longer playing the game, and so that was going to be my invasion point. I was going to invade from the UK, and the British and me were going to do a simultaneous invasion of France. And that's where we're going to pick up next episode, with the invasion of France and the response by the EU, which had grown. They had made up for the loss of France, they had new members. So now their alliance was Italy, Sweden, Poland, and Greece. Though a few of those members had gone a little bit inactive, which again, we'll talk about that next episode. But yeah, that was basically what had happened here in America. That was where we'll leave off for the American stuff. I also wanted to show the world map as of day 12. I wanted to kind of discuss some of the stuff that had happened in the world while we were, basically finishing up the American Civil War and getting all of North America under control. There's a lot of other things happening throughout the world. Of course, we had Angola in our faction, in our coalition. He was a member of the Legion, and he dominated in Africa, absolutely dominated. He ended up conquering all of Africa almost by day 12. You'll see here on the map that we're going to be showing that he had conquered most of the continent by day 12. Just a few little parts that he hadn't yet gained. I think most of those were under the AI. Their AI countries. So he dominated in Africa, fighting multiple countries at the same time sometimes. They never really fully allied together against him like they should have. Same thing that happened here in America. Just a little bit too much division, not working together, not good communication. So he was able to kind of fight them separately in a way, even when he was at war with multiple countries. He was able to conquer all of Africa, do it very, very quickly, and he became the lead player right from the beginning. And then we had a second very experienced player in Goiás. He was in South America there, and he initially focused on unifying Brazil. And he was the second best player as far as victory points go for a long part of the game. The problem with South America, though, is that most of the players there went inactive fairly early. So I think Colombia kept playing for a little while, but didn't really conquer anything, I think. I think he might have gone after Panama, actually. I think he conquered Panama. If he didn't already start with that, he might have started with it. But he didn't do much. Peru conquered one of his neighbors, and then he went active. So I don't know exactly why Goiás left, because he would eventually become inactive as well. But I kind of feel like it might have been because South America was so inactive overall, unfortunately. So that's what was going on there, though, was Goiás mostly conquering inactive players in AI countries, but he was an experienced player. He was the one we were expecting to be the main opposition to Angola, and that we'd have to deal with him. In Europe, of course, we've already kind of discussed that. They had the European Union there, but they had a lot of conflict initially with the conquest of Romania, where they kind of split up Romania. Then they all conquered Yugoslavia, and they split Yugoslavia up. The Italians attacked there, so the European Union was involved. I know that Poland took parts of Romania, as did Greece, so they both invaded Romania. And this was all before, I think, they both joined the European Union. And then Yugoslavia was also kind of divvied up between Greece and the Italians. And so the Balkans had been a place where a lot of players had been attacked. In the Middle East, Turkey was a player that was attacked very early on from all sides, taken out pretty quickly. There was a coalition in the Middle East. I think they're like the Oil and Steel Pact or something like that. They had another name initially, and then they changed it. So the leader of that coalition was Saudi Arabia. Persia was a member, as was Iraq and Syria. So that was the alliance in the Middle East that conquered Turkey, as well as some countries along their edges. They also had Egypt initially in their alliance as well. Again, we'll talk about all what happened with that coalition in the next episode. Then you had a coalition called the Emu Empire that ended up being fairly powerful early on. They started falling off because they stopped conquering, so they started falling off in victory points. But very early on, they were one of the better coalitions. And they had 5 members initially: Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Queensland, and Borneo. Borneo was the 5th member. And they conquered some of their neighboring countries, a lot of the AI countries in that area. Eventually, they didn't have anybody else to conquer, so I don't know exactly why it happened. I don't know the details of what was going on in everybody's coalitions, but eventually they did betray one of their members, Queensland, and invaded him. I think it was New Zealand and Western Australia that split him. And so, yeah, they attacked there and attacked their own coalition member. And then the Asian coalitions. There was 2 main Asian coalitions. Now, one of the Asian coalitions was the Japanese one, which he did name it after the historical, faction from World War II. The East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, something like that. And that had Japan in it, Tibet. Who else was in there? Indochina, South China, and I think there was one more country. They did have 5 members at a time. Then there was a smaller coalition that got kind of wiped out a little bit early, called like the Mongolian Empire or something like that, which was Mongolia. Who else was a member of that? Korea was a member, and I think there's one more member too, and they got kind of wiped out early on. And then you had the Second United Front. Now this is the important one, so keep note of this for the next episode. The Second United Front was created by Communist China. He was the leader of it, but as far as from what I saw in communications and in the newspaper posts, it did seem like Sichuan, which I might be pronouncing that wrong, Sichuan, something like that, Sichuan, is the spelling of that. It seemed like he was more the leader of the coalition, and they ended up becoming a very powerful coalition that, we'll be dealing with quite a bit in the second episode. And they were made up by the 2 members I just mentioned, and they kind of changed members because I think some people went inactive. So I know that 2 of the players that were initially part of that coalition left. So those were 2 of the 3 members that were part of that coalition, the Second United Front, which we'll call the SUF from here on out. They were 2 of the 3 members of the SUF that had always been members. The other one was East Yakutua. He had been in the coalition the entire time. And then 2 other members, again, I think went inactive, or they just attacked him. I don't know exactly what happened with them. But they were no longer members, and the 2 current members, and I think they might have been members. They were definitely probably members of the SUF by day 12 here where we're ending. And that was South India, who had conquered all of India, as well as Siberia. That was the 5th country in their coalition. So again, those are all the alliances in Asia, and there was a conflict between the 2 of them, between the 2 big ones. So that's the SUF and the Japanese faction, the Co-Prosperity Sphere. And so they had a lot of conflicts. Eventually, the SUF would conquer all of the Co-Prosperity Sphere, and that was really the main events that were happening in Asia at the time. Essentially, the SUF gaining control of all of Asia, or almost all of Asia, with a few exceptions, which again we'll discuss next episode. But I did want to kind of let you guys know what was happening in the rest of the world, kind of set up what some of the conflicts were going to be in that second video after the Legion had conquered pretty much all of North America and all of Africa. Again, if we wanted to win, we had to go out and go into other territories. And that's what we'll be discussing next episode. A lot of exciting stuff happened there, guys. I'm really looking forward to talk about that. It was some very interesting intrigue that happened. A lot of diplomatic events that I think you guys will find entertaining. And of course, more newspaper posts, more of those great role-playing and newspaper posts that we'll be showing in the next episode as well. I do hope you guys enjoyed this one, just kind of showing everything that's happened. It's been really, really fun. It is difficult to record this a little bit, because of, the game's pretty slow. It takes hours to move, hours to build stuff, which again is one of my favorite aspects of it. I really like that real-time element to it. But it does make it a little bit challenging to record the conflict, so I can really just record what's going on at that given moment. So I hope you guys did find that entertaining, all the newspaper posts as well. Any suggestions that you have for the third video, things you'd like to see done differently in the video, maybe certain things you'd like to see that I didn't show. Obviously, I really wanted to kind of leave, what's the world situation is here at day 20, almost day 21. I wanted to leave that up to show the next episode. I didn't want to spoil anything, so that's the main reason why we're not leaving the American view here on day 20, because I don't want you guys to see what happened yet. I wanted to keep that a surprise, but you can see what's happening here in America, and you can see I just built my first carrier, so we'll be sending that out soon. Excited to use it since I haven't built them yet, and I already have plenty of naval bombers to equip them with. And you can see that they're also level 2 now. I have upgraded them 1 level, and I think I'm going to be upgrading them another level soon. So yeah, I did again focus on the fleets quite a bit, and you didn't really get to see a whole lot of that in this episode because really I didn't get to do too much fleet actions, with the exception of quickly killing the South USA ships until after day 12. So that's another thing I'm really excited about showing, is all the naval battles that have happened over the last week or so. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to showing you guys that second video. We're going to be waiting until after the match is over. I don't know how long that's going to take, but once it does end and we have a victor, then we'll do that third video, kind of showing everything that's happened after day 12, all the conflicts around the world, and dive a little bit more into some of the other coalitions and discuss some of the things they were doing. So I'm excited to show all that, as well as our wars with them, and just the Legion moving outside of North America in Africa. So I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure you leave a like on it, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment. If you're looking for any links, including a link to the game, then check in the description of this video. At the very top, we'll have a link to the game if you'd like to try it out. Again, I've had an absolute blast with it. This campaign has been incredibly fun. I enjoyed my other campaigns as well, but this one has been particularly fun, you know, playing with subscribers. But I've really been liking the game so far, and I'm very surprised at how much I have been enjoying it. And it does have a way of kind of consuming your life a little bit. Get a little bit addicted to it, spend a lot of time with it. I've certainly spent a lot more time playing than I thought I was going to. Got Jynx involved. That's really saying something, because she doesn't typically play games like this, but she's been having a blast with it as well. She's really been enjoying playing. So if it's something that you would be interested in, check out that description. There is that link, and I believe you'll still, I might be wrong on this one, I believe you'll still get the same deal that you got using that link in the first video, where as a new player you'd get the gold and the 1 month of high command, which gives you many benefits, which again, I think I showed that in that first video. If you haven't checked out that first video, then maybe check that out. That kind of explains how to play the game a bit more, you know, unlike this one, which just focused on the events of our particular campaign here. But that'll kind of show you how to play the game. I've learned a lot since then, so some of the stuff, I would have said a few different things, kind of explained it a little bit different with all the knowledge I have now. You know, after having played this match and several others, you know, I would probably have a little bit more advice to give than that first video, but I think I did a good job explaining the basics for the most part. So maybe go check out that video if you haven't already. So again, I do hope to see you on the next video. I'd love to hear your guys' feedback in the comments about your experiences with the game. If you're one of the people who participated in this match, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments as well, whether you had a good time, what happened for you. You know, I had one person in a recent Hoi 4 video talking about how I just conquered him, and I like seeing those kind of comments for people who participated in this series with me, with Jynx and I. And yeah, so I'd love to hear from you in the comments, your experiences with the game, with this match, or how you felt about the video. I'd love to hear your opinion as well. If you'd like to see anything done differently, again, post that in the comments. I love hearing your guys' feedback, as long as it's done constructively, of course, and respectfully. So I'd love to hear your guys' feedback, so let me know. I do hope to see you on the next video, and thanks for watching, guys.